Okay, so we're going to start with the next part of the central nervous system. So if you remember, central nervous system consists of brain and spinal cord. So we've talked all about the brain and through those structures and functions, and now we're going to highlight the spinal cord. And so basically what we have here is this way for us to communicate from our body up to our brain. So we're going to have sensory information that's going to travel in this way, heading up from the body. We're going to have motor function that's going to travel from the brain down to the body. So kind of this two-way communication. It's important to note that the spinal cord is covered by the meninges, just like the brain was. So we have dura mater, arachnoid, and pia maters, as well as cerebrospinal fluid that is circulating through as well. The spinal cord is going to extend from the foramen magnum, which is that big hole, at the bottom of the skull, down to about the level of L1, L2. And this is our first landmark dealing with the spinal cord. So conus medullaris is basically the area the spinal cord is going to travel down, and it's going to end in a little bit of a point. And that's going to be the conus medullaris. And that's about vertebral level L1 to L2. And then extending past that is going to be a collection of spinal nerves. So the whole way down the spinal cord, we're going to have nerves that are going to exit, and they're going to travel out to the body. Okay, now the spinal cord is going to end, but we still have kind of a collection of spinal nerves that extend off of that conus medullaris. And this is called cauda equina, which means horse's tail. And so this is going to be kind of this little collection of spinal nerves that extend past the end of the spinal cord. Now there is another structure too, and this is called filum terminal. So we can draw just one kind of membrane here, and this is going to be the an extension of the pia mater. So an extension of the meninge, and specifically this is going to be pia, and it's going to go from conus medullaris down to the coccyx. If you remember, a little triangular shaped bone at the bottom of the sacrum, and it's going to anchor the spinal cord to the coccyx. So this little guy right here would be filum terminal. Okay, and that's basically an extension of pia mater that's helping to anchor. Okay, so what we look like what the spinal cord looks like in cross section is it basically looks like a butterfly. So when we draw out spinal cord, it's basically going to look like this. If we look at transverse plane view, it's going to come in like this. We're going to have this area here, and here. And we're going to have this kind of hole in the middle. And this is going to be the central canal. So this hole here is central canal, and it's filled with cerebrospinal fluid that's going to circulate up and down the spinal cord. Now we've got these dorsal or posterior horns that are going to be here. So let's say that this was posterior, okay, view. And so this is going to be the dorsal horn, and then this is going to be the ventral horn, because ventral means anterior. Okay, so basically what we have is all of this through here is going to be gray matter. Okay, because this is still the same type of setup as we had in the brain, where gray matter is mostly cell bodies. So this is all going to be gray matter. And then located around that, kind of on the periphery, this area through here is going to be white matter. Okay, so all of this is going to be white matter. This is all going to be white matter. this, and this. Okay, and because what we have are these tracts, so neurons are going to enter and leave the ventral and dorsal horns, and they're going to travel in tracts up and down these columns in the spinal cord, and these columns are located in the white matter. And so this is where we're going to have these bundles of myelinated axons that travel up and down, and that's why they're white in those particular areas. Now, what we see, they've got a cross section here, same kind of arrangement here. This is our dorsal horn. Okay, so this is going to be posterior spinal cord. Up here is going to be, anterior. So anterior here. So what we have is a dorsal horn, and we're going to have a dorsal root that is going to enter that dorsal horn. So our kind of direction of movement here is going to be entering the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. And what we see entering the dorsal horn is going to be our sensory information. Okay, so if you look here, we've got somatic sensory information. So this is basically coming from the body. And we've got visceral sensory information coming from organs. Okay, and they are going to enter the spinal cord through the dorsal horn. They're going to synapse with interneurons, kind of as a connector in the middle. Okay, and then they're going to exit the spinal cord here through the motor root, exiting through the ventral horn. Okay, so on this side coming out, we've got motor function that's traveling in this direction. Okay, so if you look, we've got visceral motor function, so we've got motor innervation to organs, and we've got somatic motor neurons, and this should sound really familiar. This went out to skeletal muscle, right? That's what's going to innervate that skeletal muscle. So it's going to travel, all the way down, and then you're going to have that innervation like we drew out so many times to skeletal muscle there. Okay, but the main thing that's happening here is that we have the dorsal horn where sensory information is coming into the spinal cord, and then we have the ventral horn where motor function is exiting the spinal cord and going to either organs or the body. Now, these interneurons, we can have synapses that happen at that level. So information comes in at that level of the spinal cord and then comes right back out again. Or very commonly, we have connections that are made between sensory neurons, and then they're actually going to travel up the spinal cord to the brain, right, through those columns, the white matter columns, and then we're going to create, an interaction up here and initiate a motor response that's now going to go from the brain back down again and eventually come out through this ventral motor neuron. Okay, so pair up sensory and dorsal in your mind, and then motor and ventral. They go together. Okay, so here's our dorsal root. So this is going to be, dorsal root is going to be this nerve here that's coming in through the dorsal horn. Again, these are going to be afferent fibers because they're carrying sensory information going from the body to the spinal cord. The dorsal root ganglion, it's going to be this structure right here. Dorsal root ganglion. So on all these images, you're going to see this kind of enlarged little area right here. And if I back up, you'll see it. It's the same thing that you see right here. This is the dorsal root ganglion on this image. And basically what this is these are the cell bodies of those afferent sensory nerves. So that's what that's located. I always think it looks like a little lollipop. I don't know. But anyway, that's the cell bodies of the afferent sensory nerves coming in. And then we have the ventral roots, which are going to be these fibers right here. And they're exiting the ventral horn, and they are going to be efferent motor, motor fibers. Okay, efferent because they're going to have an effect. They're going to innervate motor or muscles or glands, and these are going to be motor fibers. So basically, the dorsal and ventral roots are going to fuse to form spinal nerves. So as we travel on out here, we're going to have a whole nerve that's located a little farther away from the spinal cord, but this is going to carry both sensory and motor function. So nerves carry both sensory and motor. Okay, so at this point they're combined, and then here's where they're going to split into the roots going in and coming back out again. Okay, and this is what I was talking about before. The afferent fibers form the dorsal roots coming into the spinal cord. And once they enter the spinal cord, they can either synapse at that level or they can travel. And this is commonly what happens. So the white matter of the spinal cord is going to contain ascending tracts, ascending meaning going up from body to the brain, or descending tracts. And so this is going to be coming back down from the brain down to the body. And those are going to be motor tracts going from brain to body. Going from body up to brain is going to be sensory or afferent. Okay? And these are going to travel up and down the spinal cord. And so this is what we see here. It's important to note that ascending tracts are always sensory because they're traveling up. So they're going from the body up to the brain. And then descending tracts are always going to be motor because they're going from the brain down to the body. Okay, and you can see where these tracts, here's all of our names of these different tracts. I'm going to tell you the ones that you need to focus on, but if you'll look, they're located in the white matter, right? The tracts are in spinal cord white matter. Just like in the brain had white matter as well, and that was where tracts traveled or tracts were located, and we have the same setup in the spinal cord. So this is how they move. So here I've highlighted some specific sensory pathways, and so these are sensory pathways. So these are going to be ascending pathways going from body to the brain. Okay, some specific ones. DCML is a specific pathway that carries our sense of vibration and our proprioceptive sense, which is basically these receptors that we have in our joints that tell us where we are in space. We also have the spinocerebellar tract. So this is actually going to go to the cerebellum, and we know cerebellum is responsible for smooth coordinated movement, and that's exactly what this does. Spinocerebellar tract is going to carry information about the muscles and tendons in your body up to your cerebellum to help coordinate movement. And then our third one is spinothalamic tract. And this is going to carry specific information about pain and temperature. Okay? So, as you can see, we have different types of sensory information that's carried on different tracts. So you could actually knock out your spinothalamic tract and not be able to feel pain, but yet have intact DCML so that you can feel vibration and you have good proprioceptive sense. So it can be very specific. Now the next one is, these are motor pathways. And so these are going to be descending pathways because these are going from brain to the body, right? So they're going to be traveling down. A couple of these, we have the pyramidal pathway, which is going to originate in the precentral gyrus. And we know that that's important because that's the location of our primary motor cortex. This is where we initiate volitional movement. And so the pyramidal pathway is going to activate skeletal muscles and basically control fine movement patterns. The second pathway, the second motor pathway, is this rubrospinal pathway. And so what we see here is basically, here's our rubrospinal tract. This is more gross body movements. So this was fine body movements. This is more gross body movements. So this is large balance and postural types of movements. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, and this is what happens when we have a genetic neuromuscular disease that destroys the ventral horn motor neurons. So here's our ventral horn here. If you basically knock this out, then you end up with a situation of paralysis because you've now knocked out your motor function traveling to those skeletal muscles. Okay.